Chapter 2. The Carpet Bag. I stuffed a shirt or two into my old carpet bag, tucked it under my arm, and started for Cape Horn in the Pacific. Quitting the good city of Old Manhattan, I duly arrived in New Bedford. It was a Saturday night in December. Much was I disappointed upon hearing that the little packet for Nantucket had already sailed, and that no way of reaching that place would offer till the following Monday. As most young candidates for the pains and penalties of whaling stop at the same New Bedford, thence to embark on their voyage, it may well be related that I, for one, had no idea of so doing. For my mind was made up to sail in no other than a Nantucket craft, because there was a fine, boisterous something about everything connected with that famous old island, which amazingly pleased me. Besides, though New Bedford has of late been gradually monopolizing the business of whaling, and though in this manner poor old Nantucket is much behind her, yet Nantucket was her great original, the Tyre of this Carthage, the place where the first dead American whale was stranded. Where else but from Nantucket did these aboriginal whalemen, the Wedmen, first sally out in canoes to give chase to the Leviathan? And where but from Nantucket, too, did that first adventurous little sloop put forth, partly laden with imported cobblestones, so goes the story, to throw at the whales in order to discover when they were nigh enough to risk a harpoon from the bowsprit. Now, having a night and a day, and still another night following before me in New Bedford ere I could embark from my distant port, it became a matter of concernment where I was to eat and sleep. Meanwhile, it was a very dubious-looking, nay, a very dark and dismal night, bitingly cold and cheerless. I knew no one in the place. With anxious grapnels I had sounded my pocket and only brought up a few pieces of silver. So wherever you go, Ishmael, I said to myself as I stood in the middle of a dreary street, shouldering my bag, and comparing the gloom toward the north and with the darkness toward the south, wherever in your wisdom you may conclude to lodge for the night, my dear Ishmael, be sure to inquire of the price, and don't be too particular. With halting steps I paced the streets and passed the sign of the crossed harpoons, but it looked too expensive and jolly there. Further on, from the bright red windows of the Swordfish Inn, there came such fervent rays that it seemed to have melted the packed snow and ice from before the house. For everywhere else had congealed frost lay 10 inches thick on hard asphaltic pavement, rather weary for me when I struck my foot against the flinty projections, because from hard, remorseless service the soles of my boots were in a most miserable plight. Too expensive and jolly again, thought I, pausing one moment to watch the broad glare in the street, and hear the sounds of tinkling glasses within. But go on, Ishmael, said I at last. Don't you hear? Get away from before the door. Your patched boots are stopping the way. So on I went. I now, by instinct, followed the streets that took me waterward, for there, doubtless, were the cheapest, if not the cheeriest inns. Such dreary streets, blocks of blackness, not houses, on either hand, and here and there a candle, like a candle moving about in a tomb. At this hour of night of the last day of the week, that quarter of the town proved all but deserted. But presently I came to a smoky light proceeding from a low, wide building, the door of which stood invitingly open. It had a careless look, as if it were meant for the uses of the public. So, entering, the first thing I did was stumble over an ash box in the porch. Ha, thought I, ha, as the flying particles almost choked me. Are these the ashes from that destroyed city Gomorrah? But the crossed harpoons of the swordfish? This, then, must be the sign of the trap. However, I picked myself up, and hearing a loud voice within, pushed on and opened a second interior door. It seemed that the great black parliament sitting in front of Tophet. 100 black faces turned round in their rows to peer, and beyond, a black angel of doom was beating a book in a pulpit. It was a Negro church, and the preacher's text was about the blackness of the darkness, and the weeping and the wailing and the teeth gnashing there. Ha, Ishmael, muttered I, backing out. Wretched entertainment at the sign of the trap. Moving on, at last I came to a dim sort of light not far from the docks, and heard a forlorn creaking in the air, and, looking up, saw a sign swinging over the door with a white painting on it, faintly representing a tall, straight jet of misty spray, and these words underneath: The Spouter Inn, Peter Coffin. Coffin, spouter. Rather ominous in that particular connection, thought I, but it is a common name in Nantucket, they say, and I suppose as Peter here is an immigrant from there. As the light looked so dim and the place for a time looked quiet enough, and the dilapidated little wooden house itself looked as if it might have been carted there from the ruins of some burnt district, and as the swinging sign had a poverty-stricken sort of creak to it, I thought that this was the very spot for cheap lodgings and the best of pea coffee. It was a queer sort of place, a gable-ended old house, one side palsied, as it were, and leaning over sadly. It stood on a sharp, bleak corner, where that tempestuous wind Euroclydon kept it up a worse howling than ever it did about poor Paul's tossed craft. Euroclydon, nevertheless, is a mighty pleasant zephyr to any one indoors, with his feet on the hob, quietly toasting for bed. In judging the tempestuous wind called Euroclydon, says an old writer, of whose works I possess the only copy extant, it maketh a marvellous difference whether thou lookst out at it from a glass window where the frost is all on the outside, or whether thou observest from the sashless window where the frost is on both sides, and of which the white death is the only glazier. True enough, thought I, as this passage occurred in my mind, old black letter, thou reasonest well. Yes, these eyes are windows, and this body of mine is the house. What a pity they didn't stop up the chinks and crannies, though, and thrust in a little lint here and there. But it's too late to make any improvements now. The universe is finished, the copestone is on, and the chips were carted off 1,000,000 years ago. Poor Lazarus there, chattering his teeth against the curbstone for his pillow, and shaking off his tatters with his shiverings. He might plug up both ears with rags and put a corncob into his mouth, and yet that would not keep out the tempestuous Euroclydon. Euroclydon, says old Dives, his red silken wrapper. He had a redder one afterwards. Pooh, pooh. What a fine frosty night, how Orion glitters, what northern lights, let them talk of their oriental summer climes of everlasting conservatories. Give me the privilege of making my own summer with my own coals. But what thinks Lazarus? Can he warm up his blue hands by holding them up to the grand northern lights? Would not Lazarus rather be in Sumatra than here? Would he not rather lay down with lengthwise along the line of the equator? Yea, ye gods, go down to the fiery pit itself in order to keep out this frost. Now Lazarus should lie stranded there on the curbstone before the door of the Dives. This is more wonderful than an iceberg should be moored to one of the Moluccas. Yet Dives himself too, he lives like a czar in an ice palace made of frozen sighs, and being president of a temperance society, he only drinks the tepid tears of orphans. But no more of this blubbering now. We are going a-whaling, and there is plenty of that yet to come. Let us scrape the ice from our frosted feet and see what sort of place this spouter may be. This is the end of chapter 2. So, Ishmael gets to town on Saturday, and the ship for Nantucket is already left, and there's not going to be another one until Monday, so he has to go and find some place to hang out. Now, I talked in the last one about him previously being a schoolmaster, but he's obviously fallen on hard times. He only has a few coins in his pocket, a couple of bucks, and his shoes are patched. So if you have a pair of shoes and they wear out, what people used to do, and some people still do, I've done it myself, is the bottom of the shoe wears out and gets a hole in it. So what you do is you go to the cobbler, and the cobbler puts a new bottom on, or patches it. If you don't have enough money to pay for a whole new bottom, you just put a little patch over the part that's broken, glue it down, and that serves for a little while. So back in the day, people would have one pair of shoes that they would wear on special occasions, unless it was like cold out, but they would have one pair of shoes, and this one pair of shoes they would wear and wear and wear until it wore out, and then they would patch it, and they would patch it again, and they would patch it again, and they'd patch it again. And if you were rich and the shoes wore out, you might get a new pair and then give the worn out pair to someone else, because shoes were just like insanely expensive because they were leather and hard to make, and they lasted a long, long time. Now, I have a pair of shoes that I really like. I use it to hike. I use them to mow the lawn. They're nice quality leather top, good sole. But the thing is that I walk a lot and I'm a big guy and I kind of shuffle my feet a little bit. And because I shuffle my feet a little bit, the shoes wear out. So I've worn through the sole, had the sole replaced, worn through the sole again. I'm about to get the sole replaced a second time because I love these shoes and they're quality shoes. So Ishmael is down and out and he's looking for a place. And first place he stops out, the Crossed Harpoons. They're singing, there's dancing, everyone's happy. He's like, I can't afford this. Because then is now the nicer places, the places with happier people, are more expensive. So, you know, if you go and you stay in a nice hotel, there's going to be music in the lobby, there's going to be, you know, people having fun. If you go to a not so nice hotel, there's going to be holes in the wall, there's going to be surly people, everyone's just like, just go away, leave me alone, I just need to sleep, I don't want to deal with anything. So Ishmael's at the point of he needs to look for a cheaper place to stay. And so he looks at the first place, it's like too nice, not even going to try. Next place, too nice, not even going to try. There's a place with like a little bit of light coming out, and he walks in, and it's a church. And it's a church full of black people. Which, at this time, there was heavy segregation even up in the north. So, you would have, like, the nicer parts of town, and then you would have the poorer parts of town, and the blacks were forced to live in the poorer parts, even the ones with, like, stupid amounts of money. Because even if one of them gets rich from being a merchant, from being a whaleman, being whatever, they make a lot of money, they still aren't allowed to live in the nice neighborhoods because people just wouldn't sell them. Fortunately, this has all changed because that's just like the stupidest thing ever. So he goes into this, and he's like, okay, sorry, my bad, didn't mean to go into your church. It's really funny because he makes a couple of biblical references about sin and being destroyed just before he goes into the church. And the preacher is all hellfire and brimstone. Actually, it's not even hellfire and brimstone. It's, I think it's from Matthew, and Jesus is talking about people being cast into the outer darkness. So it's like, no, it's not you're going to burn, it's you're going to be out there in the cold, which, you know, here you are, December in New England, it is cold and it is dark. Dark, dark, dark for a long time. So he moves on from that, going into an even worse part of town. And there's the wind whipping, and he talks about this wind whipping. He's like, you know, this great harsh wind is awesome. Where you're sitting inside, and there's a nice window with frost on the outside, and you have your feet up on the fire, and everything's nice and warm and toasty, and you just listen to the wind. It's just so wonderful. Being in the wind sucks. So he goes and he finds a place, making more biblical references to Lazarus. There's two Lazaruses in the New Testament. One Jesus raised from the dead. The other one was in a parable about the rich man and Lazarus. So the parable of the rich man and Lazarus goes like this. Lazarus was a dude, he was poor, he was cold, he was starving. He asked the rich man, hey, can you help me? The rich man says, nah, can't help you. That night they both die. And the rich man ends up burning in hell. He's like, oh, this sucks. Abraham, there's Lazarus up there with you. Lazarus is like, yeah. Rich man is like, hey, could you send Lazarus down, dip his finger in water, and cool me off a little bit? And he's told no. He's like, well, can you send him back to warn my brothers? And the rich man gets told, look, you have the prophets, you have the law, Moses. They ain't going to believe it. He's like, if a man comes back from the dead, Well, they'll believe that. It's like, nah. Anyway. So, that was the references to Lazarus there. And now, here we have two lines of plot. Ishmael goes from Manhattan to New Bedford. It gets a hotel room. So, as I said, this book has 104 chapters, but barely 2 pages of plot. But it has some wonderful descriptions, and it has some wonderful words. So you just sort of sit and enjoy the illusions. And this is also one of those things that you might want to sit down with the dictionary. It's like, ooh, what's that word? And oh, what's that word? So that is the end of chapter 2.